And so with that, I am happy to introduce Mr. Orlando Bolanos. He is the Director of Gallery Facilitation and Experiences at the DoSeum, San Antonio's Museum for Kids. He is also a doctoral student at UTSA, a UTSA lecturer, a visual arts educator, and as I mentioned, DoSeum director. And he's going to talk to us about his unique perspective preparing for the workforce by reflecting on 21st century skills. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Orlando.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. I'm overwhelmed. I'm assuming that most of us are affiliated with the UTSA family. So thank you so much for taking time out of your summer to be interested in hearing what I have to say. So thank you so much. I'm in the middle of my journey, and I'm really excited where I am right now. And hopefully I can give you some insight into a process that I've been going through for the past couple of weeks, which is sort of just reflecting on my career in preparation for this presentation, and just reflecting on what were the crucial moments in my career, and what happened, and where did things go, and how that all has brought me to where I am now with my research and with my my present day job. So I'm going to go ahead and share. I just shared a link. If you wish, you can jump and play on that link. It's basically just a simple timeline, and I'm going to present it as well here. And this will just help to keep some of my random thoughts in check as I move through this timeline. You know, my story starts. My origin story starts in Texas. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. And I had a number of things that I really liked as a student. I was really interested in the arts. And so I had a few heroes. They're no longer necessarily my heroes, but I want to give credit. I was really interested in art and in making art. And so Picasso, Hemingway were some of my high school heroes and things that I was really interested in. I was fascinated by Hemingway's literature, particularly his portrayal of Spain. And so those were things that were on my mind as I graduated high school. I had a wonderful high school art teacher, Wally Linebarger, and he had been to Spain. He was an SMU graduate, and he had been to Spain. And so he sort of fed some of my interest with some tidbits of his own personal experience. And he let my imagination roam and encouraged me to think big. And so thanks to him, and more importantly, thanks to my mother, I had a single mother. She was a teacher, and she said, well, why don't you go abroad for a year? And so with their blessing, I went to Spain. I was going to stay for a year, and I ended up staying for 26 years. And so, yes, I did start with some of those stereotypes of bullfights and painters, and of course, paella. But you know, I quickly understood that the world that I was thinking about when I arrived wasn't the world that I actually arrived in. But I was really fascinated with Madrid, and that story ended up becoming that I ended up staying for my education. So I studied at the Faculty of Fine Arts in Madrid. That's the University of Complutense de Madrid. And so I did a 5-year degree there. And when I was finishing my degree, I got a scholarship to spend a summer in Stade, Switzerland. And that was for a program called Live Art. I went to paint there for the summer. And I think one of the crucial moments in my story was I met Yehudi Menuhin. And Menuhin quickly has become one of my favorite references and favorite heroes. Menuhin was a childhood prodigy, considered one of the best violinists of the 20th century. And when I met him, he was a grandfather. And he asked me some really interesting questions that resonated with me. He asked me what my art was about, and what was it for, and what was I questioning about the world, and how was I changing the world through my art. And all of those were really, really fascinating things for me to consider and to dream about. And so his questioning and that experience in Stade led me to return to Spain and work for the Yehudi Menuhin Foundation in Spain, where I spent about a decade. And in that process, I learned all about transforming the world through the arts. I worked primarily with public schools throughout the country of Spain. And I worked with other artists in artist residencies. So we inserted artists into the classroom to work with classroom teachers and provide year-long experiences for public school elementary students. And so this experience was really that foundation of everything that I've done since then. One of the things that I think really resonated with me in all of this process is that, you know, on your worst day, you've had a good day in the art room, and kids have had a good, enjoyable experience. So that's the worst thing that can happen. And if you actually are on point and they're on point and everything is aligned, you actually might have a moment of inspiration where you're giving a child choice. I think one of the things that I learned quickly in this process was that the art that children produce isn't important. It's about the process. And so I centered on this idea of process over product. And from that point on, I wanted to share with you that that led me to other experiences and other things that I was interested in. How could I improve the experience? How could I get children to enjoy the artistic experience as much as I did? And that led me to visual thinking strategies and led us in the foundation to do some experiences that were associated with museums. So it evolved from making art to also seeing art. And so this process of visual thinking strategies, just to do a little bit of a side note, was created by Philip Yenawine and Dr. Abigail Hausen. Yenawine was for about 20 years, during the 80s and 90s, the director of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And he was asked by his board whether people were learning in the museum. And he contracted Dr. Hausen out of Harvard and out of the Project Zero program. She's an expert, or she was an expert in aesthetics and in visual literacy. And they did a study and they came up with a response, which was, Orlando is a great tour guide. Orlando knows a lot about Van Gogh and about the landscape in front of us, but really nobody's really learning in the museum. And that sort of reference to are people learning in the museum was something that has always stuck with me. And so the process of relearning how we present art to guests in the museum really has been altered through visual thinking strategies. If you ask many museum professionals, what they'll tell you is that they'll know what visual thinking strategies is, but there's also waves of enthusiasm around it. One of the things that's really hard is if you're an art historian, it's hard to let go of everything that you know and not say anything. And visual thinking strategies asks the participant, the guest, to actively engage with a work of art in ways that are very different from the traditional top-down approach. So, so this is something that was really groundbreaking for me. It's summed up in 3 questions. What's going on in this picture? What do you see that makes you say that? And what more can we find? Those are the 3 questions that a facilitator uses when they're discussing an artwork using the methodology of visual thinking strategies. You know, there's so many things that we need to do as educators. And I think this is a point that is worth mentioning is visual thinking strategies really resonates with those of us that are art educators and are in the classroom. And the reason it does is because contrary to those that are in the museum, we're more involved with our kids than we are with the artwork, right? Museums are about collections and classrooms are about kids. And so VTS has really taken off in the classroom and is something that a lot of people are relatively familiar with. And even when you don't do it very well, you can get some really good results out of it. This is a famous artwork of VTS. And we can maybe discuss that in the question and A if you'd like. We can go back to that. But anyway, I just wanted to present, and this is a little wink to one of our guests, to Sunny. These are winks to you. These are some of my favorite VTS images, and just because they're very subversive in images. So we start off with something that looks quite innocent, but then we can really extract a lot of interesting observations from that. This is a timeline of my experiences, just to give you those points of reference. So VTS and joining and connecting with your people. So my people are art educators. So the National Art Education Association are my people. And I was really fortunate in 2018 to be part of the School of Art Leaders, which was really a fundamental moment for me. It was a moment also of reflection, of summer reflection, that led to me joining cohort 11 at UTSA in the interdisciplinary learning and teaching department. So I'm back from my doctorate thanks to the School of Art Leaders. You know, the thing that always came up around art education and advocacy and this idea of process over product is all of these things that happen when we're in the classroom making art, right? We're communicating, we're being creative, we're organizing our thoughts, we're communicating with others, and we're thinking about the other, right? We're thinking empathetically. And these are all just really interesting things that I think have been a part of this last stage in my career. So I joined the DoSeum in 2015 as art education manager. My work there originally was around creating a residency for artists. So for about 5 years now, we've had invited artists that come and make art for children to see, contemporary artwork. And one of I think the important things about that is that it continues to be about the process and not necessarily the product. So we look for artists that can create artwork that engages children and is interactive and is part of a social engagement model. So that's something that, again, if you'd like, we can discuss. You know, I was kind of thinking, what are the things that are in my day-to-day wheelhouse that connect me not only at the DoSeum, but through UTSA and through my doctoral studies. And I think there's not a day that goes by that Maslow's hierarchy of needs doesn't appear. You know, we're continuously thinking about, do people feel welcome in a museum? Are they enjoying their time? Are they able to think unfettered about being together and about enjoying a moment together? Are parents, particularly in a children's museum, are parents aware that their children are learning things? Are they aware that they're problem solving? Is there deep interaction and communication with the caregiver, with the parent? So those are things we're thinking about. And then of course, there's also that component of inspiration. And we know that not everybody goes to a museum and has an inspirational day, but that's what we aspire for kids to have, is to be inspired, right? And for that to happen, they certainly need to feel welcome and safe. They need to see things and see people that resonate with them, that look like them, and that can help them organize their thoughts and their experiences. So that's something that is continuously part of our day-to-day at the DoSeum. Here's a version of the hierarchy of needs, thinking of the museum world. I've left all of the links to all of these things in that presentation that you have in that link. So if you want to go and look up my sources and read the blogs, that would be great. There's one thing that I wanted to sort of establish is, okay, so Maslow is something that I'm thinking about daily, but I mean, it was like yesterday that I learned that Maslow's conception of the world, his hierarchy of needs, is based on the Blackfoot Siksika First Nation. And so I just thought that this was interesting, that self-actualization is actually at the bottom of this indigenous model, and community actualization is actually higher up. So being with others, being in community are actually more important. And this has this is something that just recently has opened up another perspective for me and asked me to question, what are we doing in our children's museum, and how are we working with people? In fact, the model that the Siksika Nation provides us with is actually quite useful, because when we look at studies that ask guests in all museums around the nation, around the world, why do you go to a museum? They don't say to see the artwork or to play with the exhibits. They say that they go to spend time with friends and family. So the main reason people go to museums is to spend time with people. So in fact, the First Nations perspective might actually be a more useful one. This sort of connects to this idea of, okay, so what am I studying and what am I looking into, and how are the things that I study in the evenings translate to the world that I have to go to in the morning at the museum? Well, 21st century skills is that process, right? A lot of people, I enter into conversation and ask me, well, what are the themes? What are the subject matters of the Children's Museum? And we say it's STEM, arts, and literacy. So STEM, arts, and literacy are the subject matters, but every child comes with different knowledge, a different level of knowledge. So a 4-year-old, they're going to want to speak about STEM, arts, and literacy. And an 11-year-old is going to want to speak about STEM, arts, and literacy. But as you can imagine, those are two very different conversations. So what are we presenting these kids with? How do we connect with them? And it's through these 21st century skills, particularly through the 4 C's. So critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication, right? Meeting a child where they are is asking them questions that they then provide us with their knowledge of where they are at. And then from there, as educators in the museum, we can interact with them more successfully. We can find the exhibits that they're going to be most enthusiastic about or most inspired about. So this is sort of like the crux of everything, right? All of my work has been around this idea of process over product. And now you find me at a moment in my life where I'm about halfway through my doctoral studies. I'm already in the career that I want, or in the spot that I want. And so it's really is a wonderful moment for me to be able to share with you that I'm getting to learn the things that it's not always so important if I finish my doctoral studies. I think I will, but it really for me is important to be able to translate my learning from the night before into my workplace. And so with that, I'll conclude, and I'll open up the floor to questions.
Thank you, Orlando. What questions do we have for our speaker? You can either feel free to unmute yourself or type your questions into the chat.
Hi, Orlando. My name is Dominic. I'm a graduate student in the MPA program. I just want to tell you, I thought I connected a lot with what you were saying today. In the MPA program, we talk about John Dewey, democratic knowledge. How do we know what we know from the public? And when you're talking about VTS, and I'm very familiar with those 3 questions. I've had a lot of friends work at ArtPace and the art galleries here. I used to work at the Southwest School of Art right after I graduated with an undergraduate degree. And I think that's one of the most important concepts when just interacting, whether it's an audience at a gallery or people showing up to a public policy hearing, that we listen to people and we try to hear what they are saying, because what we think their needs are might be completely different than what they are asking for. And it's I'll let someone else go, but just another connection I had with that. But yeah, it's this concept of art thinking, right? We don't need art education. It's probably a terrible attitude to have for sure. But I'm in a budget fellowship right now where I am supposed to visualize all of the financial data in the 3rd largest metro area in North Carolina. And if you take a Google certificate course on data analysis, same concept. How are you going to visualize these numbers? Because numbers are not visuals, they are symbols. But how are you going to communicate these things? And these higher principles of design are coming into the budget analysis process now, because it's the same idea. What is it that you're really trying to convey? Some of these questions you're asked, what is it about? what are you trying to change by showing people this? So I wrote some really good notes. Thank you for being here with us today. And I'll let someone else just chime in, or I know that wasn't a question. I just wanted to connect with you on that.
Thank you, Dominique. Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts. I think my sort of my reactions are I think we're like-minded, and you know, one of the things that I always say to people around the arts is we have a visual culture that surrounds us and that is with us on our phone, you know, 24 hours a day. So we literally receive thousands of visual images on a daily basis, but we don't prepare children to have a visual literacy, to have the ability to deconstruct visual images in the same way that we ask children to be literate with language. And to be able to see those things, you know, a famous conversation, and Sunny and I were in a class that was talking about this yesterday. You know, we talk about things like the way mainstream culture feeds us imagery or feeds us a brand. So, you know, if we were to reference, and all my respect to those that love Disney, but, you know, if we were thinking about Disney and how that permeates our lives and our childhoods, but then we're not able to deconstruct some of these images or some of these stories in ways that help us see, well, wait a second, maybe this is something that we need to be we need to practice a little bit of critical thinking around it and understand that maybe this is entertainment, but not educational.
And Orlando, I would add that one of the challenges of that is like that valuing of that literacy, right? Like we saying, kind of what Dominic said, like this idea like, oh, art literacy doesn't matter. And the challenge is not just like, how do you take that critical thinking to those visual languages, but like, do you take that critical thinking to those languages? Like, do you even take the time to teach kids to do that, or to think it's important, or to think Disney is worth being critical about? Like that valuing of our visual language is kind of that first step, and that valuing of the arts is our first step in that process.
Thank you, Sunny. I see that you had a question. You wanted to hear a little bit more about School of Art leaders. You know, I think one of my takeaways of reflecting, as John has asked, you know, me to do for this presentation is, you know, you have to have a network, and you have to be involved in the world in ways that help you connect. And it's an extra step when you're in college, and it's an extra step, of course, outside, to be involved in organizations. You know, it's just something that I'm so enthusiastic about being a part of National Art Education Association that that it overcomes the extra work that might entail on occasion. But the School of Art Leaders was an opportunity for me to go to Crystal Bridges in Arkansas and spend a week with like-minded folks from different moments in their career, which is something that I want to say is really important. That wasn't all, you know, mid-career. There were people that were early career. There were people that were late career, like myself, and it was a great moment to see just the variety of interdisciplinarity and of you know, funds of knowledge that exist just in the art world. And so there was people from museum world, from the higher education, and from schools. And so that experience really helped me to reflect on where I was headed and how to connect these dots of my past, and then sort of plan the next decade, basically. And so that's where you find me, is sort of, now I have to fulfill it. Now I have to do it.
Any other questions or comments or discussion?
Hi, Orlando. I just wanted to say thanks for sharing your story with us. And I have to say hi to Sunny too. But Orlando, I had a class with you last summertime.
Right.
And I recognized your name and your face, obviously, and wanted to hear your story. But I connected with so much in the last 20 minutes that I've just been taking notes. I'm in the Reading and Literacy Master's program in the College of Ed, and have lots of interest in children's literature and obviously literacy with young children. And I think I connected most with that idea that the visual thinking strategy is something that I think educators and obviously people in the art world are trying to bring more to the forefront with children. But I can say, I think it's lacking in the actual classroom, right? So there's that kind of switch where it's museum geared or art geared, but really it comes out a lot in picture books. And so in my time that I've been at UTSA, I've done a little bit of research into visual thinking strategy in relation specifically to picture books and how to get kids to understand that we're not just listening to the story or decoding the words if they're reading them itself, but there's so much in the visuals. And there's picture books out there that if kids didn't have their eyes on the pictures, wouldn't really understand, wouldn't really think critically about the story at the end of it. So I think it's just really something interesting to me in 2021 that there's still so much to look towards and build upon and be hopeful to the future that there's, you know, more skills in the youth so that there's more critical thinking. There's just more collaboration in the end because there's more understanding. So thank you for your hard work.
Thank you, Karen. Likewise, I just posted a link to a book called Art of Comprehension by Trevor Bryan. His book is a wonderful addition to VTS. He in some ways is indirectly connected to that methodology, but I think he's done a great job of translating what is looking at a children's book, how does that translate, and how do we connect that back to literacy? And so so there's a lot of free resources as well. So even without the book, there's some interesting things there to get started with. But yeah, I think the challenge is how do we get, you know, I think one of the reasons that people get so enthusiastic when they've learned a little bit about VTS is that it's really easy. It's just those 3 questions.
Yeah.
And so that's always something to get started, right? Like you need a methodology that's easy, that's practical, that's not complex. And so I think, yeah, that VTS just sort of gets us boosted and we get going, which I think is a very American thing, right? Like, let's get going and do it. And so VTS allows us to do that.
We've definitely had some discussions in some of our literacy classes too about the influx of technology and how maybe children nowadays their entertainment or their literacy times are sometimes on a screen, whereas trying to uplift those old paper methods or in a museum and walk around and see it, you know, not everything needs to be on a screen and just giving you the information. We need to get back to our roots of seeing real things and understanding them for what they are.
In-person experiences I think is what people are demanding after such a period of time that we've had. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
So I do have a question for you, Orlando. How do you think ultimately, you know, once you finish your PhD, how do you feel that will directly correlate to advancing you in the career that you've chosen?
Yeah, so I think this journey and this obsession with skills, as a PhD student, you have 2 experiences that are, I think, quite different. One is being able to explore a lot of interests to sort of refine what you're going to actually do your dissertation on, your research on, and so on one hand you have a lot of time to explore those areas, and then you're also sort of under pressure to define. And so I'm finding myself closer to an area around critical thinking and around around I think a cognitive flexibility, changing your mind. So we get and there's great examples around VTS. So VTS is about groupthink. So children are in a room, adults are in a room, or a mixture of children and adults are in a room discussing an artwork. And as we discuss it together, we give our perspectives. And so those new perspectives can allow, because there's no pressure, because we're just talking about a work of art, we're able to really focus on like the change, there's no pressure to stay in a position, I guess is what I'm saying. So we're in this game of discussing a work of art. And so we see children and adults change their mind and say, oh, I see your perspective and I can change it. And we're just talking about, I don't know, what is the tone of the painting? What is the mood of the painting? Are they angry or sad or distressed, right? And so we're discussing these nuances, and people come to arrangements where even with uncertainty and with nuance, people come to consensus. And I think that that's a really interesting thing from a child's perspective to be thoughtful about and know more about, like how does that flexibility occur? And then also, I think that translates to adults that hopefully would also be would have a cognitive flexibility. And I think that's something that we all agree is important right now. So that's sort of what I'm obsessed with. And then how does that help my career? I've been really careful to, on one hand, sort of try to be strategic about things that I want to learn about and how they're going to be beneficial to my career. And then at the same time, I think I tried to mention a number of times that, you know, what I study one night, I want it to be available to me the next day at work. So what I'm discussing with you today has been useful for me today too. So I try to think long-term, but I'm also thinking really short-term. And so I can tell you that this past semester, with the help of the DoSeum, I was able to do a research project, my first IRB, and I did my IRB and I did my study, and I did an analysis of caregivers' understanding of 21st century skills. And so what I discovered was parents, caregivers don't know what the umbrella term 21C skills means, but they know what a skill looks like in their child, and they know where the skills are being learned. You know, they have some pretty clear ideas about that. So that level of observation that parents have is something that sometimes I think as researchers, we have to be careful to not be skeptical about, like, oh, they don't know what they're looking for, or they don't notice anything. Of course, we as parents notice things, and as caregivers and as instructors, we notice things. And so, you know, I'll go back to Sunny's observation. Yeah, we need, Dominique's observation. We need to listen to what people have to say, because it might give us a different starting point. So I realized, okay, maybe caregivers need to be part of my research, because caregivers are already observing the skills acquisition of their children. So that's where I am right there, is at that intersection of how do I design my research for my dissertation? And then, yes, I think that helps me in a career in children's museums. You know, I think being able to answer these questions could be helpful for my field.
Perfect, thank you. Anyone else, questions or comments for discussion?
I'd like to make one more comment, and a question attached to it too. When you had mentioned the importance of community, I talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and these are some of the things I've been thinking about lately in regards to, do people feel comfortable speaking at a public meeting? Or what does food security look like in relationship to the commodities in Texas, right? These are questions that address these very basic, important needs. But as last year, as we experienced it, brought my attention to concepts like in Buddhism, the Sangha. It's like you take refuge in these communities, and even in these GPS stories, you can take refuge in these communities. You'll be surrounded by people who are thinking and speaking like you, who might be asking questions similar or much different than you. And when we're around people who are practicing these things, then it enhances our ability to really grasp what we're doing, to become more skillful. And I wanted to ask you, you know, for someone, I'm graduating in December, but I still plan on having a network. But for others we have students here too. How can the students engage a community? What does that look like for a student outside of even student associations?
You know, as a Latino, moving to Spain was a sort of a lifelong interest and maybe even obsession. You know, a lot of Latinos, we have a desire to connect ourselves to Spain or to Spanish heritage. And so, you know, when I arrived, I really drank the culture, and I hope that my answer is in that response. You know, you have to want to be a part of a community. I think you can't stand separate from it. You know, when I returned to the United States, I joined a wonderful San Antonio organization, the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center, and one of my first questions was, in the Guadalupe Theater, there's an area named after Willie Velasquez, and I wasn't familiar with Willie Velasquez's work until I saw his name on a wall. And then I discovered, well, you know, he along with Cesar Chavez were fundamental in creating some democratic foundations of voting and access to voting. And I guess where I'm going with this is that my experience in my years at the Guadalupe is you got to go out and meet the community, but also really be wanting to be a part of it. So I'm very fond of that time that I was there. I have just really good memories of joining a community and participating in that community. And I think that's something that happened to me when I arrived in Spain, and it's something that happened as I returned back to the United States. I think that's one of the wonderful things of travel and of getting to go to different places. I don't think I think of those things as strategic, right? Like I didn't think of those things as I have to do this for the success of my job. I do that because that's what I love. I love arts and culture, and I love to be a part of this. And so that also, for me personally, is a question of service, right? So how do I serve the community? Maybe now, just recently, through my studies, am I thinking of it through an investigator's eye, you know, as a researcher? I think up till now, I've seen myself as an artist, as a creative, and somebody that, you know, if you want to participate in this, you get involved. And so, yeah, I think I've been also lucky to you don't always get to choose your organization so well, but I've been really lucky to be part of organizations that have a big service culture to them associated. So that's helpful.
And if I can add, one of the things that Sunny mentioned in the chat is attending these types of sessions, which I think, Dominic, I've seen you at other of these virtual sessions. So I think doing that, and then, you know, even though congratulations, by the way, on graduating in December. I'm sure I'll be seeing your thesis come through, or your dissertation come through ProQuest to review. But, you know, we are going to be moving hopefully some of our programming. I was talking about this with Orlando before the session started. We will be doing some sessions in person in the fall, and including hopefully our first, going back to our first Fridays, which for those of you that have been around for longer than the pandemic, we had free coffee and donuts in the graduate school on first Fridays throughout the semester. We will be starting those back up in September. But I think engaging the community in that way, anytime we have a session, if you're available, you know, attending career talks like this and engaging the speaker. I think those are all additionally good ways, other than of course joining organizations and stuff like that, how to engage the UTSA community specifically. Anybody else? Questions, comments? Okay, going once, going twice. Well, Orlando, I'd like to thank you very much for speaking with us today. For everyone else, have a wonderful rest of your week, and hopefully we see you at our next either virtual or in-person session from the graduate school. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks for everybody's time.